Okay, here we go.
Oh my god, what the hell am I going to say about this? Hi guys, I'm Standard and this is the Geek in Review. Now, I thought this was just going to be a filler episode just to stretch out all the stuff with the story about how it's weird that he's calling the child Grogu now instead of the child, and I'm glad I was wrong because man, oh man, have I got a lot to say about this one, so let's get to it. And there's so much to talk about this week, old and new. We get Boba Fett that we've been waiting to see in action for decades, more reveals about the child, and the stakes are getting seriously real for everyone that's involved. We've got a bit of a funny opener, as much as Star Wars can, with Mando talking to Grogu, and he's still getting a kick, like we all are, of using his real name now.
Grogu, come on, you can have it.
But it's the way that he talks to Grogu that is the noticeable difference. He's not the only one doing it in this episode. There's definitely been a shift in how they want us to perceive the child. More of a slight or formed personality. Certainly he's aware of what's going on, more so than I think that we've been led to believe in the episodes leading up to now, or I should say leading up to last week, with the sort of conversation or the mental exchange between himself and Ahsoka Tano. But more about that later on. And although this is a very brief opener, we do get a lot from it. We can see Mando's closer attachment to the child now that he knows his name, and Grogu's still holding on to the sphere from the control panel, and Mando's using it to help develop his abilities. But this also acknowledges something that I can't get out of my head from last week, that when Ahsoka mentioned, or she asked that, has he still of his powers, or does he still use his powers? This seemed to indicate that using the Force is a sort of muscle or skill that you have to develop or train. But speaking of training, Mando also acknowledges that he can't be the one to train him, and that's where they're going to the planet to try to reach out to a Jedi, as Ahsoka suggested that they do last week as well. So after arriving on the planet, which looks great, most of this episode looks like it was filmed on location, but with the technology that they're using to make this show, it is really hard to tell. I really hope that they do the behind the scenes thing that they've done for the first season, where we get to see what's going on, because if this was in a studio, it was absolutely amazing. I seriously cannot tell if this is outside or it's inside, or it's 50-50 or 70-30 or what's going on. The scenery is brilliant, the sky looks great. Obviously some bits are sets and some bits are CGI, but for the majority of it, it looked pretty real to me, especially the sort of big gunfights later on in the episode. After they arrive at Typhon, they almost immediately get company, and it is... when you see the ship, you know who it is. It's Boba Fett. Now, we know he's going to be coming back, and man, is he ever back. He shows us what we've been waiting to see for almost 30 years. We get to see, and I do think it is the old ship they had, the Slave 2, from the original trilogy, but it's kind of hard to tell. I'll need to go back and take a look. It's certainly, if it is the same ship, it's had a lick of paint and some Go Faster stripes put on, but it definitely looks like it's the same sort of model of vessel. But just as Fett arrives, Grogu activates the stone, and he seems to be caught in some sort of force trance field where Mando can't get to him. It's sort of like an energy field that pushes him back. The effect is really well done, especially the second time that he tries to break him free. But this is something, again, that we've never really seen, but they are developing the force abilities. When Mando realises that he can't get to the child, he decides to confront whoever's landed so that he can hopefully buy them some time. He squares off directly to Fett, and during this we learn that Fett isn't after the child, he's after the armour that Mando got from Cobb Vanth all the way back in episode 1, when we had that literal cliffhanger of him looking onto the desert and watching Mando disappear with the armour that Cobb had gave him for the job that he'd helped him with. I've mentioned it before, but this season is really bringing up the fact that people are after Beskar in this universe. From the opening fight in the first episode to Mando getting trapped underwater a few weeks later, and the shiny spear commodity that was getting some real focus last week, that gets brought up as well. So they really are indicating that there's some sort of currency that's getting used, or there's some sort of high value. It's not just a value or a sort of traditional or sentimental or religious value that the Mandalorians have. This thing does have a real price, and it is a real commodity in the universe. Mando asks Fett if he is actually a Mandalorian or a bounty hunter. Fett doesn't really answer, and Mando basically tells him to do one as he's not a Mandalorian, so he's got no chance of getting the armour off him. Now, rather than attack Mando, which everyone was sort of expecting a big Mandalorian on Mandalorian action, Fett reveals that he's not alone and he's got a sniper on the child, and it's only bloody Fennec Shan from the first season as well, so we've got that mystery cleared up, and everyone who noticed the sound of the boots back in the end of that episode were right. It was Boba Fett that saved her. Now, we don't get told exactly how Fett himself survived the events of Return of the Jedi, but at this stage, who cares? Because man oh man, he's all over this episode, finally showing us why he's such a badass bounty hunter that we've all heard about but we've never seen. But before we can get into too much exposition, they're cut off with Imperial troops landing, obviously following Mando from the device that's been left on the Razor Crest from a few episodes ago. Mando tries again to get the baby out the field, but is thrown back and knocked out, meaning that Fennec and Fett have to deal with the troops, and they do that in a pretty amazing, severe, intense, and the best way possible ever. I mentioned a few times already that we get to see why Boba Fett is so good, and if you're a Boba Fett fan, this episode is like Christmas come early. We see him smash, stab, shoot, impale stormtroopers, and that's not even before he puts his armour back on. From the second the troops land, this episode is all go and all action. And when Fett does land back in the armour, I think a lot, and I do mean a lot, of fans that have been waiting decades to see this are going to get exactly what they want. He comes in and kills a bunch of them and manages to destroy both their transport ships while they're trying to escape. But since when did dead stormtroopers ever stop a good Imperial plan? And before we can take a breath, a bolt shoots from the sky and it destroys Mando's ship, the Razor Crest. And I have to say, you know, it was a cool ship, and it did show up, or at least it seemed to show up in The Rise of Skywalker, a similar model to it, but it's been beaten to death from the first season all the way up to this season, and what I think is going to happen is he's going to get Boba Fett's ship, whether that's Slave 2 or Slave 3 or whatever he's calling it these days, or, you know, there has been rumours about Pedro Pascal leaving, so this could be setting up, continuing the series with another Mandalorian and Fennec Shan. That would be absolutely fantastic, but I'm going to talk about the possibilities of that in my main video. Once Moff Gideon's destroyed the Razor Crest, he unleashes the Dark Troopers Iron Man style from the side of his cruiser that's in a low orbit of the planet. And when I do say Iron Man style, this isn't the first sort of scene that shows up in this episode. Almost straight away when they land on Typhon, you get a scene of Mando flying with the baby, and this has got huge Iron Man influences, and quite right, because Jon Favreau, as we all know, co-created The Mandalorian, and he also directed the first two Iron Man movies as well. This episode has been directed by Robert Rodriguez, and it just, as always, looks amazing. It does have a very different Western feel, not as much as the last episode did certainly, but there are hints there certainly at the end as well with what's going to happen, but I'll talk about that in a second. After Moff Gideon's forces have escaped, Mando surveys what's left of the crest, and man, it's not much. It's just a big charred hole in the ground, and the only thing that's intact is the Beskar spear that Ahsoka gave him at the end of last week's episode. But this spear, I think, is going to play a huge role in the season, and definitely maybe even the season finale. Certainly the finale that's going to happen between Mando or whoever it is that's going to face Moff Gideon, because we learned last week that lightsabers can't cut through Beskar, so what better weapon to fight a guy with a lightsaber, or indeed a darksaber? It's definitely going to get used to kill Gideon, maybe not by Mando, but I guess we're going to have to wait and see. Fett and Fennec agree to help Mando find Grogu, and instead of leaping after Gideon's ships, the new formed gang decides they can't do this on their own, and Mando tracks down Cara Dune, who's now higher up in the New Republic, and he wants her to let Mayfield, who is played by Bill Burr from Season 1's episode The Prisoner. So they're doing it! We're getting it! We're getting the Dirty Dozen, or the Magnificent Seven, or the Seventh Samurai! Either way, it's going to be amazing. He's putting his whole team together for what seems to be the big fight with the dark saber wielding Gideon, and it doesn't matter if this is the finale or not, it's going to be absolutely brilliant, and it is definitely going to have absolute consequences. We don't know yet. As I said, there's been quite a few rumours that Pedro Pascal hasn't been happy about how he's getting treated on the show. He wants to get his face out there, and that's not going to happen. So the show's called The Mandalorian, it's not called The Din Djarin Show or The Grogu Show. So they could be bringing in Boba Fett to replace him, they could be bringing in any number of Mandalorians, they could be keeping him around. If they do decide to kill him off, It doesn't really matter if he likes it or not. They can stick a guy in the suit and then just do whatever they want. We don't get to see his face, but let's not think about that. Let's get back on track. So speaking of the Darksaber, we do get to see it a lot closer up in this episode. Gideon pays Grogu a visit after catching him, and the little guy's bouncing stormtroopers off walls like they're squash balls. While he seems impressed, you can tell that Gideon knows this isn't a real threat. He taunts the child as using the Force seems to exhaust him, which again supports what Ahsoka said last week when she asked if he still has his powers. Both these scenes seem to support the fact that the Force again is like a muscle or a skill. You have to develop it, you have to practice, otherwise it's just kind of an impressive but dangerous party trick that you might have. But there's so much more. I mean, there's so much more, and this is just my first reaction to what is an amazing episode, and it's got so much potential. And I had anxiety, I had stress, I had fear. I didn't have any joy other than the fact that I was watching it because I care about these characters. But my God, what an episode, what a show. But this is just my opinion. What do you guys think? Was the Boba Fett comeback everything that you'd hoped for? Let me know in the comments below, and you can reach me at Twitter at The Geeks in Reviews. That's all one word as well. Leave a comment, leave a like, and do leave a subscription as well. Take care of yourself. I've been The Standard, and this has been The Geek in Review.